Even though science has done so much for human beings, you just have to take a walk in a graveyard here or in France, anywhere, and you see the graves of 7, 8-year-old children in the 19th century, and you don't see that today. You see mothers who have died in childbirth, and with medicine and chemistry, that is not so. And despite this fact that the lifespan has been enhanced, we are wearing brighter clothes, we have more things to do, people are not so happy with science. They think that perhaps science has brought environmental ecological problems. Well, we have brought them by wanting to better our condition, but science has certainly created the means for doing so. I think science has to change in this century. It has to put ecological, environmental considerations up front. They have to be part of the process of doing science. People have to think about these considerations. We are not going to become saints, but the person who says, I am cloning, let somebody else worry about why to do that, I think that day will be past. I think the scientists will have to worry about the consequences. I think also scientists will work more on problems of importance to humanity, be they an alternative to the automobile or to the internal combustion engine for the automobile, fuel cells, a hydrogen economy, solar power. I think scientists will be working on this. But they cannot accomplish anything without an underlying will by people for social change. Scientists do not run this world. I don't think they should run this world. I think people should run this world. And I think they have to have the social will to change things. Well, people are not fanatical about chemistry, but people use it, they want it, and they're afraid of it. I think it's both. Look, when my grandson has a fever, and my daughter takes him to the doctor, and I went along, the doctor prescribes some new antibiotic. I really want that antibiotic to work, to cure the fever, but I ask about side effects. I just can't avoid that. So there is this double relationship, but that medicine is very much on a human level. It is truly anthropic. Quarks and galaxies are very nice and romantic, but they can't heal you, nor can they hurt you. I think the chemicals of life are very close to us. That steroid that we are worried that some Olympic athlete is taking is 4 atoms away from both male and female sex hormones. I think that's interesting. I think there's a lot of interest in chemistry. It may not be romantic, but it makes life possible. So most people think of science by itself as just being materialistic. Find out what things are, determine what they are, answer questions of what, when, how, why. Well, the why is the theoretical part, and maybe the why is a little bit spiritual. But I think science and the knowledge we gain from science has spiritual value as well as material value. Actually, I care less about the material value. I don't own a single patent, and I'm not rich. But the spiritual value that I get from a trivial thing that I do, which is to find out how one piece of molecule is oriented relative to another one. Or I want to find out why it is that carbon monoxide binds to hemoglobin. Carbon monoxide binding to hemoglobin is what kills people when the automobile exhaust is. I find that it binds, and as it binds, it bends, so that the iron in hemoglobin and carbon in the oxygen are not in a line but are bent. I want to know why. When I find that out, that it gives me the satisfaction of knowing why that carbon monoxide binds better than oxygen. I think that's interesting to know. I think knowledge has spiritual value. I also think that the actions of science are in some way spiritual. I have worked with some young people who are trying to duplicate a dye that indigo, and how it works when a piece of cotton and wool is dyed in a way that it was dyed 2,000 years ago. And there's a transformation. The indigo is by itself, as it's gotten from snails or plants, is not a good dye and has to be treated chemically. At the end of the process, it's a transformation, a chemical transformation. At the end of the process, there is some white wool that is coming out of the solution, and before my eyes it turns blue. Blue as the sea, blue as the sky. I don't think it's just because I write poetry. I think that transformation, maybe because it's symbolic of a transformation of human beings undergo, maybe because it's symbolic of the way the universe is transformed by us, to me that has spiritual value. It's a chemical reaction, but I react to it as a human being. It means something more than just that reaction. I come from a Polish-Jewish family. Eventually, after World War II, came to the United States. Those of us who survived. We were never religious. We come from the kind of Jewish background where socialists and communists come from. I didn't become religious later on, even though I learned much more about the religion. I learned more about my own religious background, and with it came a respect for also the religious background of the surrounding cultures and how Judaism interacted with them. I think Judaism means a lot to me. The construction of Jewish identity is very complex, as it is for many Jews around the world. It is not solely a religious identity. It is some complex ethnic mixture of background, of music, of food, of all the things that make culture. Now, why are there more Jews who are in science, perhaps? Why do they have an easy time for science? Certainly not because they're smarter people. If you want to find out, anyone who is so silly as to think that Jews are smarter than other people, all you have to do is to send them to Israel and to have them live there for a while, and they'll find out otherwise. I think the Jews were always outsiders. If not immigrants, they were outsiders to the societies, even in Europe and some places where they lived. Outsiders are watchers. You watch carefully what people do. In some ways, by being outside and watching in some ways that's a little bit like science is. There is nature, and you don't know what it is, and you watch it, and you think about it. Okay, there's a tradition of literacy, a tradition of literacy being valued, of learning being valued. Those who were religious studied the Talmud, years of hundreds, centuries of commentaries on the Bible, legalistic thinking, which in some way had some semblance to scientific thinking. It's interesting that most Jews who are successful as scientists, the great majority of them, are no longer religious. They're not atheists necessarily. They're still Jewish, but they're not observant. Now, what's interesting is sometimes I think that, you can leave your religion, but you can't leave it. And so what I mean by that is you substitute some other religion for it. And I wonder if for some of those Jews, either psychoanalysis or Marxism or science became a substitute religion. So the beginnings are there in the words of Abrahamic religion. It's interesting that so much of Israel is not religious. There is a very strong religious minority, and there is a Jewish state which has its problems as it works its way toward being a more universal state. I think what's interesting to me actually is the immigration. That is, if we take France as a specific example, the Jews and the Muslims there are both immigrants. They're immigrants. They try to establish a cultural identity. What's interesting is how they benefited in a strange way. They took advantage of French culture. I think of the schools of the Alliance Française in Morocco. They were attended by the Jews. They were attended also by the people from the Moroccan professional classes. I also think there is something about, for many of the immigrants, both Jewish and Arabic that I've met, there's a certain ease with their religion. There's an adaptation to the secular French culture, a taking advantage of it. I don't think it's universal for the Arab minority at all in France, and that's a real problem. But for some segment of it, maybe I'm seeing just the professionals. But I see a kind of integration into European culture, which is actually very nice. I only wish it for more of the Arab immigrants into France, that they would take the best of what French secularism and French culture and French education can give them, while not abandoning their own culture. That's the other thing that certainly happened in the United States and Canada, and I don't think it's quite happened in France, is that somehow in our immigrant melting pot, people seem to be able to forget the ancient hatreds. I don't know what it is. It's not that they all like Coca-Cola, but there's something that they've learned to live together. Now, I don't think it's just on the surface. I actually think it's real.